Johannesburg Mayor Kabelo Gwamanda and other officials inspected hijacked buildings across the city today. This is after 77 people died when the Usindiso building went up in flames in Marshalltown last Thursday. They discovered that a Johannesburg Metro Police impound lot had been hijacked and construction work was in progress. Officials reclaimed the property, arresting 20 people. eNCA's Heidi Giokos was on the scene and she joins me now. Heidi, good evening to you and thank you so much for joining us. It's absolutely unbelievable that a Johannesburg traffic lot would have been hijacked and even having construction on the premises. I mean, how does this even unfold?
Exactly, and I think that's the key question here, and I don't even think city officials have the answer to this. But we were told of the mayor on his way to a very large property that is owned by the city of Johannesburg this afternoon. We were told that it was supposed to be a JMPD pound yard, so when JMPD impounds vehicles, they were going to use that area to leave the cars there until they are collected. When we got there, we noticed that there were about 20 or so people that were lined up. So basically they were found on the property. There was a whole wall that was actually built. And interestingly enough, you have parts of the property where there is still wall, or parts of the old building that was on that property where there's actually names and surnames of various people. And we were told that people were already starting to come and claim their spot of the yard or the property, because there was going to be an informal settlement that was going to start mushrooming up. There was a lot of confusion as to who hijacked the property, who decided to bring in these workers to start building, how they got access to the building, why it was left for so long. We were told that this was a property that was bought by the city in 2019, but it seems as though people just go on about their lives. People do as they wish, because we clearly have an issue of city officials not acting as quickly as possible. And this further highlights what we saw happening in the CBD last week, Thursday, the seriousness of hijacked buildings, the seriousness of needing alternative accommodation for people that are living in these kinds of conditions. But let's listen to what the mayor had to say in terms of the arrests and what they found when they got there.
We were doing an audit and identifying alternative properties that the city owns in order for us to be able to allocate for temporary shelters. Upon the inspection, we then discovered that Denver impound, which is in the custodianship of JMPD, is indeed one of the facilities that are potentially in the list of being hijacked. Upon arrival, we found contractors, private securities, and they were building structures behind us. Fortunately, through the accounting officer and the JMPD department, as led by politically the MMC and the chief of police, responded swiftly. They also involved other departments where they arrived on site and demolished a structure and arrested 20 people. Of the 20 people, we have 12 South Africans and 8 foreign nationals.
So Heidi, I mean, this building obviously was not occupied at the time, and from what the mayor says, they discovered this while they were inspecting other hijacked buildings. So it's a coincidence. In other words, this all happens and transpires under their watch, purely meaning that they're not aware of their inventory or what is going on with these hijacked buildings.
Yes, and that was the question I asked the mayor and city officials today, was to say, okay, if you are saying that you're starting to identify buildings that the city owns and you are starting to figure out what property and land the city owns, what are we looking at here? And it seems as though out of 100 and something odd, the city is investigating and looking into 17 buildings. But what's mind-blowing about this particular property is that the city paid 40 million rand in 2019. They bought this from Nampak, we understand, for 40 million rand. And Cindy, when I tell you that it's just an open piece of land with a dilapidated building where it's just like wall structures, there's nothing really concrete there. So the question is, firstly, why did you pay 40 million rand for that? Secondly, why has it been sitting since 2019? But when we asked these questions to the mayor, he did indicate that they were in the process of handing it over to JMPD, and then JMPD said that they cannot use that for the impound yard, and it basically just fell through the cracks. But now they are aware of it, and they have been monitoring this property for about a month, and that's why they decided to move in today to remove these people and arrest whoever was basically hijacking this. Let's listen to the mayor once again on the details of this actual property.
So this facility was purchased in 2019, and it cost approximately 40 million. In the process, the procurement process, there was an argument between JMPD and the administration in saying that it does not make sense for this property to be used as an impound for JMPD. It is not conducive for that purpose. However, due to the political will then, it went through and it became a white elephant. Now, the MMC of Public Safety has been coming to me saying that, Executive Mayor, this is a challenge that we've had as the city. There is this facility. Can we utilize it possibly for the purpose of establishing temporary structures? Hence the MMC of Human Settlements is here with me. However, upon arrival, we understood that it's in the process of being hijacked.
Of course, now taxpayers are going to be overburdened again with another commission of inquiry that needs to investigate entirely the decay and the rot of the CBD or the city centre. Over and above that, now that we've heard from the mayor, by his own admission, that they weren't aware of this building until they stumbled upon it. What do you make out of all of this, particularly when it comes to the leadership and whether there is political will to sort out this mess?
Well, the previous mayor, Herman Mashaba, who was on an aggressive campaign to sort out the city, has told us a number of times that there is no political will. I must say that we are seeing some sort of action and movement, but many would say it's a bit late, given that 77 people have now died in one of the hijacked buildings. And what's even devastating, Cindy, is the fact that this was a building where the 77 people died, that was a shelter for women and children. So it just goes to show you who was actually supposed to be taken care of in those buildings, and it ended up being a hijacked building. On that issue of the Commission of Inquiry, I must emphasize that perhaps the Commission of Inquiry scope needs to be broadened in terms of understanding how many hijacked buildings there are, how it got to this point, and what's being done. We understand that there is an issue. We know that the city is dilapidated. There are a number of buildings, apparently over 600 of them, that need urgent attention. But what is going to be done to fix them? Not necessarily just what happened last week Thursday in that particular building. So there's a lot that needs to be investigated. And at the end of the day, it needs to be people-centered. As much as there's a political, I don't want to say fight, but squabble happening at the moment between the Premier and the city officials, at the end of the day, it needs to be people-centered because they are affected, and you and I as taxpayers are also affected.
Absolutely. And you threw around a figure of 40 million rand. I mean, this is obviously a perfected transaction in the sense that there was an asset, an immovable asset, which is the premises, and somebody had pocketed the money. One would like to believe that in terms of their procurement processes, you can track where the money had gone to and why it hadn't been utilized for its purpose.
Exactly, and 40 million rand for that, I'm not really sure if that was the right price to pay for it. I mean, I'm not in the city's books and finances. I have no idea what exactly transpired there, but that is something that I think is rather alarming, especially if it was going to be used for an impound yard and then later on told it's not conducive for an impound yard, and now it's going to be possibly used for alternative accommodation or housing structures for those that have been left destitute, not just from this fire, but just overall housing issues in the CBD. So it's alarming that it's also been standing since 2019.
Yeah, and we see them now, the politicians and of course officials, on the electioneering trail, albeit that they almost galvanize around a disaster as we've seen with the Marshalltown fire. But the hope one would have is that indeed something can be done or should be done, considering that they were aware of this perennial problem of hijacked buildings that are dilapidated and inhumane to live in, and yet they turn a blind eye.
Exactly, and this is not the first disaster that's hit the CBD. If you just think about a month or two ago with Bree Street, that was also a disaster that you don't understand what actually happened there, what's happened to Bree Street at the moment. There are just many issues within the city, and I think the biggest concern, even just covering all these stories, is the fact that this is not a new problem. It's been existing, and you have a situation where the new officials will say, but the previous administration, the previous mayor, the previous administration, but yes, what are you doing about it now to sort out these issues, because these problems aren't new. Herman Mashaba was mayor back in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, and he was there for about 3 years. So that problem was already existing. It's not like this problem has just mushroomed up in the last year or so. So it's definitely going to have to be a thing of, we need to sort this out now, and there again needs to be political will to do so, because people cannot. I want you to just take a second, Cindy, and just look behind you. This was one of the hijacked buildings that we were in yesterday, and you cannot believe the squalor people live in. And people stay there because they have no alternative. People stay there because they have nowhere else to go. And if they are placed in shelters, oftentimes they're sometimes removed, or they just cannot live there because it's a shelter, it's a public space. So something urgently needs to be done about this housing crisis and the broader issue within the city.
Heidi, thank you indeed for the update and your insights. Really appreciate it. That's eNCA's Heidi Giokos, who was out in the CBD, where the mayor also addressed the media around issues of the DK in the CBD.